During Uncle's podcast, MGTOW, there was a moment when someone asked what will happen in the next 10 years, but they didn't specify what exactly, whether it would be economically, politically, or even in terms of relationships between men and women. And so, a little earlier, I think I had already shared my theory that we're kind of in a cultural lag right now. Japan and South Korea are about 20 years ahead of us. Europe is about 15 years ahead of us, and the United States is 10 years ahead. So you just had to look at things that way. But that was before we had so much social media, so much Twitter, so much YouTube, and everything else. It seems like things are speeding up even more now. The changes, I mean. And then during the hangout, we all came to that same conclusion. Me, Uncle MGTO, Kadama, Angry Fox 2, which is this. The government is going to have to get out of the way first because women aren't having kids anymore, so they're not creating more slaves. For the government, Social Security won't be sustainable anymore. You won't have a growing population and more public money because men will also start working, at the very least, not getting married, not having children. So the government will no longer be so interested in funding feminism. He's going to look for another segment of the population to use as pawns, maybe immigrants, other minorities, and so on. There won't be that money to fund feminism. Also, because once men don't have women, don't have children, they can have a more minimalist lifestyle, retire earlier, and so on. And so the point, in the end, is that we're going to need one or two generations. The women from Generation Y are going to have to end up single, grow old, and be on display for the whole society with a bunch of unstable women who didn't get married or have kids, and serve as an example for the younger generation. And then, who knows? Maybe the next generation, honestly, I don't think Generation Z can be fixed either. Maybe the generation of women and men that comes after, maybe without feminism, without the government interfering, things might get back on track. But then, in my opinion, there's another issue, which here in the manosphere, in the MGTOW community, we have some roles to play. The first is really a role of mutual support, emotional support, social support, because whether we like it or not, we can't speak openly in our generation. Professional life, academic life, the things we believe in, it's really hard to meet another guy like that, MGTOW in person, in your own life. So our first role here in the community is this mutual support. You have several friends, MGTOW online. The other role we have to play, which is an important one, is related to this moment. Later on, when feminism is no longer being funded by the government, maybe the government will step out of the relationship between men and women, and maybe then men and women can renegotiate their contract. Because, we think it's going to take a while. Because for our Generation Y and Generation Z, there's something that was discussed on the podcast, which is this. It's quick to lose someone's trust. And women have been losing men's trust over the last 100 years. They took political power and used it only to control and destroy men and families, and everything else, all based on hypergamy and greed. So to win back our trust from the current generations, X, Y, Z, it's really hard, man. Really hard. That's going to be something else that's also going to be a challenge for the next generation and the even younger ones after that. Even the guy from the misandry bubble, from the article, he said that the misandry bubble would burst in 2020 and the cost of feminism would fall on the next generations of women. That's something even Pandey mentioned in his article about the bill for feminism coming due. But then we have the first role here in the MGTOW community, which is mutual support, like a network of friends, of people you know online. The second role is this. There are a lot of people here who are the children of feminism. They're men who, never had contact with a father, an uncle, or a grandfather. They never had any male contact in their lives because their mom was a single mother, or she ended the marriage and filed for divorce, or maybe even your dad drifted away after splitting up with your mom, or even after she got pregnant, because he saw how the laws were, the family court, the Maria de Pena law, and all that. So I don't remember. What's that line from Fight Club about a bunch of men raised by women? But anyway, there are a lot of people here in the community. So from the very beginning, there was this interaction between older men and younger men. You've got guys who are 40, 50 years old acting as father figures to men who are 15, 18, 20, 25, playing the role they never had in their own lives, never had from a father, an uncle, or a grandfather. A lot of times people ask me, where did I learn all this stuff I know? Man, from a bunch of people online. Like with IBI Bor, who's also around 50, who is Black Gnostics Peaks, with DDJ, who's also in his 50s or 60s, Think and Ape, who's about 40, and so on. There are a bunch of guys you learn these things from, and the sooner you learn, the better. So, we kind of have to keep putting out content and fill that role for the guys today, and even for the younger ones who will come along in the future. Because, it doesn't matter if later on, if feminism gets scaled back, stops being a government program, if the government steps out of the relationship between men and women, and the time comes to renegotiate the social contract between men and women, if the next generations of men don't know the things we know, you get what I mean. Because the point I want to get to in this video now is that just like back then, as I'm seeing now in 2018, 2019, there are women who are trying to go back in time. They're trying to go back in time and they're saying, no, no, I'm a traditionalist, I'm a conservative, or conservadia, as people say. And they're going to want to play chameleon and say, no, but I want to be a wife, I want to get married, I want to have kids and all that. And the thing is, like I said before, as long as we have the Maria de Pena law, as long as we have family court, and on top of that, as long as we have people who don't pay taxes voting, we can't accept this deal. Not for our generation, not for the younger generations, not for the ones to come. So we have to pass this information on to future generations so they don't just blindly give their trust. Blindly having this blind faith in women and keep offering things to them for nothing in return. Because that's how we ended up in the chaotic situation we're living in today. So to sum it up, it's like this. We're going to have one or two lost generations and then the generations that come after. After that, women are going to have to earn back men's trust, and we have to teach these men, these young guys, to demand something in return and do things the right way. Like for us, maybe for men today, it's already too late. So the thing is to live your life your own way. But what I noticed in the videos I've been watching is that it's not just about them. They're gonna have to earn men's trust and admit the mistakes of feminism and all that stuff. No, me, it's worse. It's worse than that. Like you used to think, nah, this is something that'll happen later on. No, it's already happening with a minority of women, like the ones who are a bit smarter. And they're starting to realize that the party's ending, that the whole feminist free-for-all is coming to an end, that the government is kind of abandoning them. And most importantly, they're realizing that once they're no longer wives and no longer mothers, they don't have any social power left. They have that social power until they're 30, 35, because there are a bunch of guys chasing after them, wanting to hook up and all that. But after that, they don't. So, like, they're not going to be honest and try to win back men's trust. They're going to do two things that are way worse, okay? The very first strategy they are planning to implement, which many observers believe is going to be the most incredibly shameless and blatant action they have ever taken, and it sets a very controversial tone for everything that follows, is going to be this. The first move, which is more aimed at feminists, simps, and the more beta guys, is this. They'll even admit that feminism existed and that it was a problem. But they're going to play the victim. Remember that phrase I always say, like, responsibility is a woman's kryptonite? They're going to play the victim, blame cultural Marxism, blame the government and corporations. They'll say that they, poor things, have weak minds, and that they were manipulated by the media, the education system, the government, and everything else to act like feminists. But that they're not really like that. That they found themselves again, the female nature is different and all that. And a bunch of simps, blue-pilled guys, cucks, male feminists are going to fall for it. And they'll think they've found their unicorn. And the woman knows exactly what she's doing. Okay, that's the first move. This fits with what we talked about. We have to spread as much information as possible. Red pill, especially for younger men, so they don't fall for this. Then there's the second move, which is also shady. It's even shadier than the first, because in the first one, they at least admit there's a problem with feminism. They're taking a little bit of the blame, but not all of it, because they're playing the victim and acting like they're not responsible for their own minds, their own decisions, their own actions. Well, if they're not responsible, then why the hell do they vote? But anyway, moving on. The second move is going to be even more messed up and dishonest. It's going to be the move of simply completely ignoring that feminism ever existed. Ignoring that it ever existed. The problem of feminism, and they're going to use shaming. Basically, shaming is that tactic of trying to embarrass a man by saying, oh, you're not good enough, you're not alpha enough, you're not responsible enough or dominant enough to handle me. It's that whole talk about how I need a strong man. That's really the move of the thread dots. For those who know the English speaking channels, if you look up, for example, I think it's Brittany Pettibone, there's Lauren Southern, there's Roman Millennial, and here's the thing, when this rightward shift started happening on YouTube, I think a little before Trump, starting around 2014, 2015, a bunch of thread thoughts started popping up. A bunch of women trying to act conservative, trad, traditionalist on YouTube, starting their own channels and saying a bunch of things that a lot of men had already said long before. But the difference is, since it's a channel run by a cute girl, dressed nicely, with makeup on, wearing more conservative clothes, they end up getting an absurd amount of followers. And it got to such a ridiculous level that, for example, Roman Millennial and Lauren Southern, they had to take their Patreon and only show the number of people who pay for their Patreon and not the amount of contributions in terms of money in dollars, because it got to the point where they were making 3, 4, 5,000 a month without doing a damn thing, just running a little YouTube channel, talking to the community, right-wing folks and all that, a bunch of stuff I had already said before. And even among these guys with more conservative right-wing resources, there are a bunch of simps. We have an example of that here in Brazil, the realists, honor the family, I want to get married, I want to have kids and all that. And they're easy prey for these women. But what's the problem? They completely ignore it. At no point do they talk about family court, the Maria de Pena law, marriage laws, divorce laws, nothing. They just ignore it. They go straight to shaming. And there's an example, another one, a newcomer in this group of thread votes, the conservative girls, which is that something like that. Shepherd, I can't remember her name right now. I put the little video down below. I'll have to try to remember. Let me just check here. She's the one who got caught up in some drama at the universities in Canada. That I really can't remember, unfortunately, but whatever. It's something like that. Shepherd, a little girl with a beanie. But anyway, she was from those humanities courses. She kept going to those humanities classes, then for some reason, she had a falling out with the people there. The university's social justice warrior, she was harassed and all that. And she had her phone recording and got a bit famous, and then Sargon Avocado started talking about her, Computing Forever too, all those people from that skeptic community, which is just a bunch of egalitarians, a bunch of idiots who believe in equality between men and women. But anyway, so she started getting a bit famous, made a little YouTube channel and posted some videos there. Why did she leave the left? And she basically started copying all the content from Lauren Southern, Patty Bone, and Roaming Millennial, who just pretend to be chameleons, acting like traditionalist conservatives to get famous and make money off betas, those suckers who keep giving them money. Because, if they're really that traditionalist and all, why aren't they married? Why don't they have kids? Why are they just on YouTube making money and staying single and getting famous? And some of them are even becoming kind of millionaires, like Anita Sarkeesian level. And then, in this case, there's Shepherd. She was one of those who's a bit ahead of the curve, a little more tuned in to what's going on. Because, for example, it's something that people even mentioned in the comments section here, that obviously Men lost a good portion of their jobs because the agricultural and industrial sectors were totally automated or outsourced overseas, and then only the service sector was left. And in the service sector, there are a lot of women, but now we're starting to automate a bunch of things in the service sector too. I'm even talking about jobs in banks and so on. And women are starting to notice this. So here's the deal. There are even some channels. There are some channels that are kind of sympathetic to MGTOW and all that. But here's the thing. They're trying to give these women a chance, like to say, yeah, you really should get married young. You should have kids. But like I said, they're not dealing with issues like family court. They're not talking about the Maria de Pena law. As long as these two things aren't out of the way, aren't eliminated, no man should have to get married and have kids, whether it's this generation or the next ones. But anyway, they're realizing that things are going to get worse for them. The government is going to stop supporting them. If they don't get married and have kids, they won't have social power. Their jobs are disappearing because everything is getting automated. And in Canada and the United States, women too, they graduate with college debt of 20, 30, 40, 50,000, 60,000, some even more, depending on how long they stayed in college. And then they want to marry a husband, because here's the thing, once you're married, the woman's debt becomes the man's debt too. So there are a lot of women who pulled a scam. They marry a guy, stay with him just long enough to pay off their student debt, and then they file for divorce. But anyway, what's the move these conservative women are proposing now? And there are a bunch of men on YouTube too defending them and putting them on a pedestal. Oh my God, we finally have our traditional, conservative, respectable women, you know? Women of family values, honor, and all that. Here's the thing. There's something I think Rollo Tomasi and Rushvi have already talked about, which is like female gain. Female gain goes like this. Remember that phrase I always say? The female imperative is to get as many resources as possible and to get the most benefits possible with the least amount of effort and the least amount of responsibility. So here's the deal with the female game. It's what all women have been doing up until now. Generation X, ever since the start of the second wave of feminism back in the 1960s. Take the 1960s up until around 2015, almost 2020. Here's how it goes. Wiving. When she turns 15, she starts her sex life, and from 15 to about 30 or 35, she only goes after the alphas. When she hits 30 or 35, she finds a beta to marry, stays married just long enough to secure alimony for herself. Then she stops working, maybe works part-time, has 1 or 2 kids, stays with the guy for 5, at most 10 years. These days, it's often even less. And that's it. She gets a house. The guy pays off her debts, keeps the kids, she gets alimony, and she's set. And depending on the country, these women can even get access to their ex-husband's retirement benefits. So that's how it was. From 15 to 30 or 35, it was the cock carousel. From 30 or 35 up to 30 or 45, it was the little family life with some average Joe and all that. Then, after 40 or 45, she was free again and went back for a little more of the cock carousel at the end. Or she had total financial independence at her ex-husband's expense, with the kids all to herself and everything else total ripoff. So really, nothing has changed. The only difference now is that these women, the more conservative ones, the slightly smarter ones who can see the parties coming to an end, they're realizing they can't afford to wait until they're 30 or 35. They're gonna have to, starting at 25, right after they graduate, already find some sucker. They'll just have to cut back a little. They're only willing to shorten their ride on the carousel of guys a bit. That's it. And that's where things get dangerous, because we know that a 25-year-old guy is much easier to manipulate. He's got a much higher sex drive than a man who's 30 or 35. That's why I think the role of the community is important. The red pill community, the MGTOW community, to educate younger men so they don't get manipulated, so they don't fall into these traps. Why? If they're taking this approach and there's still family court, there's still the Maria de Pena law, what makes you think these women won't just finish college around 25, find some sucker, Okay, the guy gets to have a wife who's a little younger, a little hotter, right at the peak of her looks and fertility. But then, what makes you think they won't just stay? 5, 10 years married to the guy, have a couple of kids, and then divorce him and take him to the cleaners? Screw the guy over, you know? Use the Maria de Pena law to make some accusation against him, then use family court to just take the kids for herself, keep the house, get alimony, and all that. I mean, for this woman, it's actually an even better option because she just finishes college and doesn't even need to start working. She spends about 5 or 10 years being supported by the guy, and then afterwards, she's still a bit younger with the house, the kids, and alimony. She could even, in one of those cases, get back on the carousel if she gets divorced at 30 or 35, and the man keeps getting screwed over. So I've included some videos here from Economic Invincibility talking about this issue, about women who aren't getting married, who aren't having kids, that they're becoming more unstable, having more psychological problems. Another video about their economic disaster because of student loan debt and everything else, and the fields they work in. These are already fields that pay less because they choose easier areas, but they're also fields that are going to be automated. And the other video was about how automation is going to affect women. I don't remember who it was, maybe Bazarov or someone like that, who left a comment on one of my videos, and he talked about some people in banking, criticizing Banco do Brasil because at Banco do Brasil there's no equality, there's no feminism. That's nonsense. That's just banker talk. Because if you look at it, in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a bunch of bank strikes, and the banks pulled some strings and started laying people off, closing branches and automating things as much as possible. So these women, they're just using this feminism argument and all that just to defend keeping those jobs for women, saying you can't automate. But anyway, getting back to the point. And so the video I put in the main description is from Planet MGTOW. I think the guy is Angry MGTOW. He just changed his channel. He's kind of like Sandman. He's kind of crazy, even crazier than Sandman, but he makes some predictions that actually come true. Sandman? Back in 2014, he was saying that women would beg men to come back to the plantation. For men to come back, get married, have kids, and all that. Who's going to say the guy wasn't right? That's exactly what's happening. And then this angry MGTO from Planet MGTO, he said the same thing. That women would start begging guys to get married and have kids and all that. And we know why. Because of student loan debt, because their jobs are being automated. And there are a lot of people who are just going along with it. They, acting all conservative, wanting to put you on a pedestal and saying, no, it's okay, you're going to be a princess. And then in this shepherd video, one thing everyone pointed out is this. She only talks about what she wants, that she's at the peak of her fertility. And that now is the best time to have kids and get married. And that she wants to do it now. She doesn't want to put it off. But at no point does she say what she's willing to do for her husband, what she's willing to sacrifice for him, what she's willing to give him. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And that reminded me of that Coltane video about domestic parasitism. Just look at her arguments. She said that according to Canadian law and all that, she could marry the guy, have a kid, and both of them could work part-time and raise the child. But she said no. She prefers that the man supports her and that she wants the privilege of just staying at home, taking care of her child. She said it just like that, her child. She didn't say it like it was the guy's child. So you see, Chameleon, it's absurd. She went to some leftist college, used to be a leftist, realized she could get more by pretending to be a conservative, and now she's acting all traditional and conservative. But honestly, she can't even pull off the act properly. And like I said, okay, ignoring the whole issue with family court, with the Maria de Pena law, which is based on the Duluth model, right? And she just wants the guy to ignore all that. And honestly, she gives herself away even more. She says it right here. Abortion? She believes it should stay legal and free. So yeah, she's a so-called traditional conservative, but she supports abortion. But at no point did she mention giving men the right not to take responsibility too. If a woman can end a pregnancy, then the man, he should have the right not to take responsibility. Nope. So that's strike two. For a strike, she wants the guy to support her, but isn't willing to offer anything in return. Second, abortion has to be legal and free. And again, she didn't say anything about that. She didn't mention the power of feminist laws she can use later to get rid of the guy if she wants to, because, like I said, she's about 25 now, wanting to get married and have kids. But when she hits 30, still kinda young, she could totally stab the guy in the back, turn him into her financial slave for the rest of his life, and then go chase after other guys. You know what I mean? Sacrifice the beta and go after the alpha. Alpha fucks, beta books. But then she gives herself away even more. And it's just ridiculous ignorance because she came up with that talk about how Canada is super overpopulated. And that the planet is way too overpopulated too. All that is just communist socialist bullshit. And then she said no, that women have to have kids and all that, because then the government won't have to keep bringing in a bunch of immigrants, which she thinks is better not to happen. Why? Because that's what I said. A woman who doesn't get married, doesn't have kids, she loses her social power and the government stops caring about her. So she's already seeing what's going to happen to white women in the United States and Canada. If they can't get married and have kids, become mothers and wives, they're going to lose social power because the government will look at them and think, okay, fine, they're voters, but they're just leeching off the system, not doing anything. They were already leeching before, but at least they were raising the next generation of slaves. Now, not even that. And worse, it's totally independent from the government because she couldn't even marry the guy to make him her slave for the rest of his life, you know? So before, she used to leech off her husband and leech the government. Now she just wants to leech off the government. The government is a son of a bitch, but it's not stupid. So they know that if they don't fulfill this social role of becoming a wife and mother, the government will abandon them and start prioritizing minorities and immigrants, you know? I mean, she tried to act all conservative and then even started flirting with this nationalism talk. And then her final move was the stupidity of coming out and saying this, look. Yeah, but it's also because, on the other hand, people, they don't need to have kids. Like, Canada's population could even shrink and all that because people can take care of themselves in old age, even without children. Okay, that argument doesn't hold up. Not in public nor private social security. If you're going to depend on public social security and you haven't saved anything your whole life, which is usually what women do, then who's going to work and pay taxes to support you in the future? If in your country people aren't having kids, if each woman isn't at least having 2 children, and you might say, no, but there's private social security. Okay, but there's just one little detail, man. When your population starts to shrink, you go into a recession. A great example of this is over there.
Super bien.
Because the economy doesn't grow. And where do you think your private social security money goes? It goes to a company to manage, to invest in the market, and as long as there's economic growth, there will be a surplus to guarantee your retirement later. But what happens when there's no birth rate, no economic growth? So, like, Roman Millennial and Lauren Sunderland are pretty hypocritical too. They're translators, they're conservative, but here's the thing. They're a bit smarter, they're more trained. That one was kind of a new. But really, it's to show you that this isn't just going to be a problem for the next generations. Generation Z, or even further down the line, it's going to be way in the future when women try to abandon feminism and pretend to be traditional and conservative. Nah, man. The smarter ones who see the parties ending, they're already starting to do this. Even now, in 2018. The misandrous bubble, that's already happening in 2020. I didn't think it would happen this soon, you know? It might even be a minority. But here's the thing. Men need to be prepared for this. So we don't fall for the unicorn myth. We have to keep playing this role of educating the younger guys. Because there are going to be 2 moves. Either they're going to play the victim and completely leave out the whole family court and Maria de Pena issue. But they're going to play the victim and say, no, I'm just a poor, weak-minded woman. Feminism manipulated me, brainwashed me, it was cultural Marxism. So now I'm better, now I've improved, now I'm a woman worthy of having a husband and having kids. Now, that's bullshit. And this other move by the Thread Thoughts, the so-called conservative girls, of just leaving things out, saying a few bullet points, a few little phrases to try to pass themselves off as conservative, as traditionalist. But then they go and defend the same values as feminists, taking the worst of feminism and the worst of traditionalism, because there's a worse side to traditionalism too. She wants the man to provide for her completely. The worst of feminism comes with the talk that the planet is overpopulated and that abortion should be legal and free. And also with the idea that people don't need to have kids. But if you don't get rid of family court, don't get rid of the Maria de Pena law, she has all the power in the relationship to make the man. She can do whatever she wants. Accuse him of this or that, treat him like dirt, boss him around at home and in family court. She has every right to just leave him and take everything from him. So it's even worse. What we see is that women, not just in the future, but right now, they're not even willing to try to regain men's trust. After 50, 100 years of feminist abuse, now not even that. Worse, they're being completely dishonest and either playing the victim, acting like chameleons, or totally hiding the whole feminism and feminist rights issue, trying to appeal to those traditionalist guys who want to see themselves as super alphas, Honor the family, I want a traditional woman, a conservative one for myself. Like, no, man. It's not going to be like that. If it depends on me and on the MGTOW community, it's not going to be like that.